Okay, we're on now. Yeah, so James, I know you're here. Joe could not be here. He is working until very, very, very late tonight because
God bless him.
he works in retail and it's 2 days until Christmas. So
Yep.
he's working until an ungodly hour tonight. I believe after midnight he's on until so
Wow.
he could not be on. Um, but we're gonna start. James, how? First of all, this is your first championship game in this league, at least. Um,
Yep.
Feels good, especially all considering all of the flack you've kind of taken all year.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, you know, it's it's good. So, uh, you know, uncharted waters. Just trying to do the best I can. And Joe has a pretty good team, and we'll see what happens.
So I know, and a couple other people noticed this as well. What was with the Team Tebow pickup for about 10, 12 hours yesterday?
That's just me fucking around, enjoying uh, limelight, I guess you could say. There wasn't really anything behind it.
How did you find him?
Well, the odd thing is, I'm in two other leagues,
Mm.
and my cousin, who I'm in another league with, he's been out of the playoffs for the last 2 weeks, and he's just like, you know what? I'm just gonna fuck around and put Team Tebow in, and I'm like, oh wow, and I'm like, hell, I might as well do that, just to fuck around as well. So kind of like a
Yeah.
copycat thing. So
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is you can't actually leave him in though,
yeah,
obviously.
so
So I was gonna go back and look at the season that was for both of these teams, starting with you, James. And I'm gonna put this out there, and I'm sure you already know this. I don't have to put this out there for you, but you're entering this game very much so the underdog in a lot of respects. Do you feel like you're the underdog here?
I do.
Okay, okay, because we look back. I mean, you played Joe in week 9. Joe won pretty, by a considerable amount. A decent amount. It wasn't a blowout, but he won by 24 points.
Right.
Um, your season was very odd in that your team was outstanding the first. You started the season 5-1. Your team was playing very well, and then the second half, it was weird because the second half, if you look everything from week 7 to week 13, your team didn't score more than 121 points.
Right.
And then it looked like, I mean, I thought you were in trouble going into the first round against John. And then the last 2 weeks in the playoffs, your team's playing like it did back in September.
Right.
So a bit of a kind of a up and then a down, and then you're on your way back up. Now, with that said, too, do you feel you've gotten a little bit lucky here, James? Because you have John scored 91, Justine scored 88. Both of their teams basically crashed and burned against you the last 2 weeks.
Sure.
Okay. Uh,
Uh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was just wondering if you feel you got a little bit lucky. I mean, it wasn't neither
I,
game was close. Let's be honest.
yeah, I mean, a little bit was luck, but part of that was, and I'm sure you as well as everybody else noticed this. I've been really working the waiver wire with the limited amount of money that I have, which is zero,
Mm-hmm.
and just trying to find decent matchups, and Falcons defense helped. Uh, Robbie Anderson helped, and Cooks went off for a game last week
Mm-hmm.
finally again.
Right. You're
I had to do a few
basically,
different things.
yeah. I mean, to be fair, I mean, I guess the impressive thing too is people are forgetting you're doing this with a injured Aaron Rodgers and an injured Jordan Reed as well, who are two of your big name guys.
Right.
So, I mean, we can't forget about that either. Um, Joe's season was Joe had a really good year. He went 11-2, but he didn't have. It was not a lucky 11-2 by any stretch of the imagination. Um,
Right.
he's scored his lowest score of the year is 112 points, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
he's got a consistent team.
yeah, I mean his team scored at least 130 points in 10, if you include last week's win, 10 of 14 games, which is it's really hard to do that. He just missed the scoring title. Glenn just barely beat him out in the scoring title. Um, his only two losses, week 11 and week 12, he lost in week 11 to Larry by 9, and he lost to John in week 12 by 16. But other than that, I mean, he's played a few of his wins were a couple of his wins were close, but most of his wins were pretty sizable. He didn't
Right.
play a ton of close games. The game against Brendan last week, it ended up not being close in the end. It was a little even. I was actually out with Brendan watching the games last week, and it was a little even for about the first half of the 1 o'clock games, and then at that point, everything just sunk for Brendan, and
And,
obviously Joe pulled away when Drew Brees went off late,
oh,
and Tom Brady.
yeah. Well, you just hit on the point there with Tom Brady. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, not saying I told you so, but I told you so, especially with some of those later matchups in the year. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Drew Brees going off, that's one thing, but, if I think a lot of people thought Tom Brady would at least be able to be within a few points of Brees, but clearly that wasn't the case. And, this is why I got rid of him when I did. Obviously, I could have gotten more out of that trade, and we can dispute that till hell freezes over. But I mean, Aaron Rodgers hurt did more than Tom Brady. So
Yeah, well, I mean, in all fairness, with what Brendan had, he couldn't play. I mean, it was a no-brainer. Brady had a bad matchup, but he couldn't play Eli Manning against the Lions last week.
oh, of course, no, I'm not.
You know.
I'm not saying that. I was talking more along the lines of the trade rather than anything.
Right,
That's what I was
right.
trying to get
Well,
across.
I mean, when you see, and it's funny because we were watching when Mike Gillislee scored his touchdown last week, and Brendan went crazy at the time, which you can't blame him. But I mean,
Right.
I think that was more of his flaw than anything else. Was he had Mike Gillislee playing running back in a semifinal playoff game. I'm I mean, you can't. I don't know how you're going to win with that. Say I know he's trying to luck his way into a championship. He even admitted he was going to try and luck his way into a championship. But when you're going up against a guy with DeMarco Murray and LeGarrette Blount, it's very hard
Yeah.
to it's just such a mismatch. But Joe got in.
I mean,
I mean,
yep.
he won. So I, it is what it is at this point. I do know. I mean, and this will not surprise you, James. Brandon is rooting for Joe to win this week.
Yeah, that's fine.
He's not making a secret about that, but it is what it is. Um, I'm looking over just the rosters. It's funny because just going back to Joe's team, I have the rosters up right now. I mean, I feel I know I bashed the hell out of Joe at one point this year when he was going on his undefeated run. It was probably unfair for not trading for depth.
Right.
And you know, in a sense, now that I'm looking back at that, Joe probably made the best decision he could have in not making a trade this year.
Yep.
Because when you look at it, you have when you're in a position like Joe's in where he was at the top of the league the whole year, you don't have a whole lot to gain, but you could lose a lot
Yep.
when you're sitting on top. And what Joe was able to do, he didn't have to give up any key pieces. And he was able to add some guys like you did on the waiver wire recently, most notably Taylor Gabriel, who's actually played very well
Yeah.
the last few weeks. And it was a really good pickup by Joe.
Right.
With that said, I mean, his team. He still doesn't have much on his bench, but at this point, it really doesn't matter. He has no
Exactly.
injuries. He has no injuries this week, and this is the last week we're playing. So at this
Right.
point, is the bench really doesn't come into play at all.
Right.
At the end of the year, and he's going with, and we're going to get to this when we look at the matchup. He's going with this same no lineup changes, same exact lineup he had last week. So,
Right.
which it really isn't much of a surprise, but it is what it is. Now, your team, James, ignoring the fact you
Disarray.
have what's that?
It's in disarray. I
Well,
know.
yes, I know you have three. So I did. By the way, I did do the math, which I'll get to in a minute on the projection. You'll be happy to know. Um, but your team's actually came away healthy. The only guy you're going to be missing this week is Jordan Reed. I
Right.
believe. I know he's officially questionable, but I don't say it. He's not playing tomorrow.
Well,
Um,
that and I don't trust him with the 10-foot pole right
no,
now. So,
no, he hasn't done anything the last 2 weeks.
yep.
So you can't. At this point, I don't think anybody would be able to play him.
Right.
But I mean, overall, your team, you've gone with a unique strategy this year. You've admitted you went with a unique strategy. Your running backs, you never had a consistent running game for most of the year. You had a few guys that had good weeks here and there, and you know, a bunch of running back two, running back three guys.
Right.
Um, but you never had a true number one back. And it's funny because it's something you don't see in championships for fantasy football. I always thought that, you can be strong at other positions, but I rarely do you see a team get this far without a number one, well, at least one good back.
Right.
Um, so you do have the number one quarterback of the season. Even though he's been hurt, you have the number one tight end. You have a top 10 receiver in Cooks, and you have a bunch of guys. As you said, you kind of have to play the matchups because of the players you have. Outside of you have five guys, 4 or 5 guys you can play regularly, and then you have a bunch of guys who may be good depending on who they're playing that week.
Right.
Yeah. Um, with that said, I did do the math. You'll be happy to know. And you're right now, after factoring in last night's results, you're a 9-point underdog, give or take.
Okay.
Um, so I know Sterling Shepard, very good game last night, 19 points. He was not projected for anywhere near 19.
Right.
Unfortunately, you could have been in better shape, but Matt last night, and
Right.
so he only got, I think, 6 points. But
Yep.
we're going to go, I guess we'll just go position by position here since this is the only matchup and we have tons of time to do this. Starting at quarterback this week, it's tough. How much confidence, James, do you have with Aaron Rodgers going against Minnesota? Because it's a kind of for me, it's a weird matchup.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can really say is I drafted Rodgers for a reason. He's still putting up some points despite being hurt, and compared to the waiver wire, he's the best option I have, and got to go with it.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say it's a weird matchup is because Minnesota, for the most part, has been good this year. However, last week against the Colts, they were not good. And Andrew Luck actually put up the most points of any quarterback did all season. And really, if you look over the last month, the Vikings defense has not been what it was, the first half of the season.
Right.
So playing at home, Rodgers, I think he'll have a better day than many people will expect him to. With that said, Drew Brees has a much stronger matchup. I think Brees has the edge here. ESPN says Brees has the edge. I think Brees has the edge here slightly. I think ESPN kind of has it in the. I mean, it's hard to say who really has the edge. I mean, it's Rodgers has been the number one quarterback this year. Brees is number two in fantasy
Right.
points. So,
Yeah.
so it's
You're
a kind
splitting
of
hairs.
yeah, it really is. It really is at this point. Now, running back is not splitting hairs.
No, it's not.
We're not splitting hairs at all. There's no denying who has the advantage here. Um,
Absolutely, it's Joe.
I, yeah, I mean, DeMarco Murray has a very what I think is well, I shouldn't say very. He has a good a good matchup against Jacksonville. Garrett Blunt has a good matchup against the Jets. Um, Now Blunt's made me nervous. Um, over the last the recent weeks. The thing that makes me nervous about Blunt is that he didn't have a great game against Denver. Um, the last time they played the Jets, 11 carries, 67 yards, and that's it.
Right,
It was actually Blunt's worst game of the year. Even though the Jets defense hasn't been, the Jets have been pretty awful since that game.
right.
And Blunt just he doesn't. One thing he doesn't bring you, he doesn't catch a whole lot. Everybody knows that he doesn't. You can't count on him for any receiving points in a given week, uh, especially with Dion Lewis now.
Right.
Um, yeah, James, Tevin Coleman's your only your your saving grace at this point. I'm assuming you're playing him. You kind of have to play him, whether it's at running back or the flex. But not a great matchup against Carolina.
No.
Uh,
So I'm honestly, and I'm just going to be honest.
hmm
Whatever you see in play now, by tomorrow morning that can change.
Well, I
Because
was
I'm
gonna
still contemplating everything. So
right, and I was gonna. I mean, and that's the other thing. Your other main options here. I mean, you have three other running backs on your bench. You got both Baltimore running backs, which is kind of a messy situation to begin with, and then you have Justin Forsett, which I don't know if you can really do anything with that.
I
Um,
agree.
um, I mean, to be fair, Pittsburgh's been running backs have run on Pittsburgh this year. Um,
They have.
which is kind of goofy because people haven't really been talking about. But running backs have done damage against Pittsburgh this year. So the real problem here that I have with the whole West Dixon thing is because it's really such a strict timeshare, especially recently. I mean, especially Terrence West has been. You don't know what you're going to get in a given week.
Right.
It's a dangerous play at this point. I mean, it sounds like you don't know what you want to do with the running backs right
Yeah,
now.
I really don't.
Uh, and you got also the issue is with the Christmas with the goofy schedule. Baltimore's
Yep.
playing Sunday the late afternoon, and of course you have these other guys. Coleman's playing tomorrow. Uh, it puts there's a lot of different time slots this week, which puts little bit more pressure on some of these lineup decisions. Um, I don't think. I mean, we already know Joe's got the advantage here. I think the question here really is not whether Joe's running backs will get more points than yours, but how many more points will they get?
Right.
And do you have any hopes that maybe Coleman or somebody else can limit the damage at the position? Or
Yeah, I honestly don't know.
mm, it's hard to say. You move on to wide receiver. Um, it's kind of goofy. You guys are kind of built. I think, very similar wide receiver. You both are very dependent on your number one guys. Brandon Cooks for you. Um, Joe's got Jordy Nelson. It's very funny this week because you have Cooks, Joe has Breeze, Joe has Nelson, you have Rogers. So you guys are going to be neutralizing yourselves a little bit at wide receiver
Yep.
this week,
Yep.
at least at your top spot. The good news for you, and a big reason why I think you may be okay at wide receiver, is Sterling Shepard had a good night.
Yep.
You're liking what you saw from Shepard last night.
Yeah, and just in terms of point total, I kind of figured between Matthews and Sterling, I would need at least 20 points combined to be
Mhm.
competitive, and I was able to get that. So I'm lucky to be competitive right now.
That was Shepard's best game of the year actually last night in terms of fantasy.
Yep.
Um, big. That was a huge one. Right now, Joe. The thing about Joe's matchups with the wide receiver position, I mean, Alshon Jeffrey at this point, he had a good game against Green Bay. He's actually played pretty well. The reason he's ranked, he's 52nd in points is because he missed 4 games because of a suspension.
Right.
Otherwise, he'd easily be a wide receiver too. He finally scored his second touchdown of the year last week. I just don't know though. They're going against Washington, and that you got the dreaded. I'm sure Josh Norman's going to be on him in that game.
Yeah.
And that would make me pretty nervous. It's not a good matchup for Jeffrey. Now the opposite can be said for Taylor Gabriel. The more of the question for Gabriel's Carolina's corners are not good this year. They haven't played well all year. Atlanta does have Julio Jones back this week. He's playing. So that will probably take a little bit on. Take a little bit. I don't know if it will be a good or a bad thing. Maybe it will be a good thing that Julio will take some attention from Gabriel, or will Julio take targets from Gabriel? I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to tell, Mike.
Yeah, it is. I love the matchup against Carolina's corners, but it's hard to say how Julio's return is going to really affect Gabriel's targets. Your wide receiver 3 spot is empty, and you have a lot of options.
I do.
5 of them, and with projections all around the same at this point. I know you've switched around. Robbie Anderson was in there at one point. I know at one point you had Ted Ginn in your lineup. Any idea? What are you thinking right now with that slot?
I'm gonna have to sleep on it, Mike.
Well, what have you thought already?
Just got to play the matchup accordingly, and hope for the best.
It's going all Bill Belichick tonight.
I'm sorry, it's just my mentality right now.
I know. It's hard to say. I don't even know who I'd play in your spot. I know. I mean, the Robbie Anderson pickup. I got to give kudos to you for that, because I think it was actually on here a few weeks ago where Larry mentioned he didn't even know who Robbie Anderson was.
Well, Larry knows who he is now. So.
Well, but I would hope so, but I don't know, because I don't think Larry's watched the Jets game in about a month and a half with the way they've been playing.
True.
But I mean, Robbie Anderson, 16, 18 points the last 3 weeks. Outstanding numbers. Well, not outstanding, but very good for a guy who's, not done a whole lot. Bryce Petty seems to like him. They have a rapport. So it's definitely, he's been the hot hand at this point. Another option here that I was looking at, Cameron Meredith, a very much what I consider a boom or bust option. He's had 19 points the last 2 weeks. The problem with Meredith is he's had like 4 outstanding weeks this year, but when he's been off, he's been really bad.
Agreed.
Yeah. I feel it's he's a little bit of a dangerous play, especially in a game like this.
Yes, but you gotta weigh it out. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. And then, of course, another. I mean, we can go through all these options. Ted Ginn scored 4 touchdowns the last 5 weeks after not scoring in the first 9 games recently, after a really awful first half. And then, of course, there's Marvin Jones, who, Marvin Jones at this point, a lot of his points, he hasn't scored since week 6. I don't think you can play him at this juncture. However, matchup-wise, he arguably, maybe he has an okay matchup against Dallas if you believe the Lions are going to be behind in throwing in that game.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds there's all kinds of things you could do. You obviously haven't made your mind up at this point. Uh,
Yep.
so we're going to go to tight end. This is another spot. This is a spot that I think for sure you have an advantage. And I'm going to tell you why. It looks even. It looks actually pretty close on paper. It's Greg Olson for you, who's been the top tight end this year, against Jimmy Graham for Joe, who's had kind of a renaissance. And I think at least for Joe, maybe he's had. I mean, if you go back through Joe's draft, he had an outstanding draft, an outstanding preseason
Yep.
with his keeper picks. And so, I mean, he snagged, and I know you did too, James, but Joe snagged some guys with some lower picks that nobody was even considering,
Right.
like Eric Blunt, Drew Brees, Jimmy Graham. And that's really been the key to his success. However,
Agreed.
Jimmy Graham this week going against Arizona. Arizona is outstanding against tight ends, the Arizona defense. Um, if you look this year, no tight end has scored more than 10 points against Arizona,
Right.
which is a pretty insane number. And they've allowed one touchdown to tight ends this year, which is insane. It's insane. I mean, when you look at tight ends are averaging 5 points a game against Arizona, that's not encouraging at all. Now, Jimmy Graham, Arizona, that game they allowed 10 points was actually against Seattle, and Jimmy Graham scored 10 points on them earlier this year. But I'm not encouraged. Graham has had one catch each of the last 2 weeks. He hasn't looked good. The spot sitting where you're at, where Joe's at here, he has to play him.
Right.
Because he can't play at this point. Kobe Fleener's just as bad of an option at this point. Fleener hasn't done anything the last 2 weeks, and obviously you can't play. In my opinion, at least, you can't play Hunter Henry, even though Hunter Henry has been better than the other two. Hunter Henry does have 4 touchdowns the last 5 games, but he doesn't get a whole lot of targets. So you have to play Graham, but I think Joe's going to lose a lot of points here, especially with Olsen going in. Olsen has a very good matchup against what I think is a Atlanta secondary that doesn't have the linebackers or safeties to match up with him.
Right.
Now I know, I talk about all your lineup decisions. There's playing Olsen obviously is a no doubter for you. Think you can make up some points at this position to make up a little bit at running back?
Possibly. We'll see. I mean,
Mm.
it's an area that can help. So.
Going down to flex, Joe is sticking with the guy he picked up last week, Ken Farrow. Now, Farrow has looked at least from everything I heard, going against Oakland last week as a starter. He was very ordinary. He scored 4 points.
Right.
Didn't do anything outstanding, but they're playing Cleveland this week. Now, I'm not too confident that San Diego's even going to beat Cleveland. I'm just throwing that out there right now. I actually hate the. I think if I don't know, I'm talking crazy here, but the Browns, they have a wide open opportunity to win a game this week.
They do.
Because San Diego's given up on their season just as much as any other bad team at this point, and they're flying cross country. And people have to remember, with a lot of the games on Saturday, it's a short week. And for a team that had to fly West Coast to East Coast, it's a very short week, going from late afternoon Sunday game to an early afternoon Saturday game.
Right.
So I actually don't like, even though Cleveland is Cleveland, I'm not crazy about Ken Farrow, and I don't like ESPN's projection of 14 points for Farrow. It seems a little high for me, for my taste. With that said, James, I have no idea what you're going to do about the flex, and I'm assuming you don't either.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I could give you more, Mike, but I really don't know.
I mean, we already talked about all your options, really. The
Yep.
only option we really didn't talk about here is Vernon Davis, who is an option with Jordan Reed if Jordan Reed isn't playing. Davis has
Right.
actually not been bad when Reed's been out of lineup. I mean, is he a
Yeah.
consideration?
Yeah. He is. He is.
Okay.
You know, everything underneath the sun right now is a
Yeah.
consideration, Mike.
Yeah, I know. Um, so I mean, you could still go with the two tight end set if you really wanted to. That's always an option, but it's hard for me. I don't. I'm going to call flex a wash at this point because I don't like when I don't like Ken Farrow in Joe's lineup, even though he really doesn't have. At this point, Joe doesn't really have any options on the bench. He can't play Jeremy Maclin anymore, even though Macklin's back and healthy. He can't
Right.
play him. Robert Woods is not dependable enough. Kenny Stills is he just has a lot of too many boomer bust guys. Farrow is probably the highest floor guy
Right.
out of the group, so he doesn't have any wiggle room here. I still don't like Ken Farrow in that lineup. But with that said, your options are very iffy as well. So I think the flex is just a wash.
Yep.
Um,
Defense. Defense.
defense.
I'm probably gonna go Redskins.
I would imagine. I mean, that seems a smart. You like the matchup against the Bears?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Pittsburgh against Baltimore is a little nerve wracking. Um,
Yep.
yeah, the Ravens can put up points. They've shown that they can put up points this year. Washington is tough because their defense. Uh, they have you're playing the matchup here, I presume, right?
Yep.
Okay. Against bad offenses, they've been perfectly serviceable. We're at the point. I mean, there's not a whole lot out there on free agency on defense.
No, there is not.
Um, no, so I mean, there's not. This is probably the best matchup you're going to get. Um, um, don't like Matt Barkley at all, James.
No, I'm not very high on it.
All right. I it's tough. I think Washington. I wouldn't expect too much from Washington. It's a tough position for you as well because Joe has the number one fantasy defense with the Broncos, um,
Right.
which they don't have a great matchup against Kansas City. And people, it's funny if people remember that Sunday night matchup when they played Kansas City. What was it? Thanksgiving weekend. That was a defense. It was a great defensive slugfest. Where Broncos only got 11 points out of that, which is very ordinary for them. They have the
Right.
tendency. The reason their point totals are so high, they've scored a bunch of touchdowns this year, like they did last year. They're good at. They have some good pass rushers. They're decent at generating turnovers. The last 2 weeks they haven't looked great. They weren't great against Tennessee 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Of course, New England. I mean, you can excuse them for not looking great against New England, but they were very ordinary with 2 sacks. Um,
Right.
I think the Broncos defense will have a slight edge here, but I don't think the edge is going to be as big as people may see on paper.
Right.
Um, yeah, and at that point, I'm not a kicker is what it is, but if we were if this game was to come down to 3 points or 2 points or 1 point, Ryan Suckup's got a good matchup against Jacksonville. Um, so Stephen Hauschka has got a more of an iffier sort of matchup, but a not bad matchup against Arizona. So um, ESPN apparently says Jacksonville's allowed the most kicker points this year. So you have that going for you.
Mhm.
All right. So before I make my pick, what do you think is going to happen this week, James?
I think Joe's gonna win, but it's closer than what everybody thinks.
Well, considering you have empty roster spots, ESPN says you're going to lose by 60, but obviously that's wrong. Um, well, have you talked to anybody about this week or
I have
no?
not.
Okay.
I have not.
I think there's a lot of people. I think everybody does expect you to win, or expect Joe to win, I should say.
Right.
it's pretty apparent his team's pretty stacked. His team's been great the whole season, even though
It,
I've improperly said some awful things about his team for no reason. He went
right.
11-2, and it was funny. I was pointing out a few things. Um, he's a number one seed for a reason. A team that's gone 11 and ever all the teams that have gone 11-2 this week go on to win the Super Bowl, at least in past history. Typically, number one, only once has a number one seed lost in a Super Bowl. Number one
Right.
seed is 1-2 straight. There's just a lot of history that's in favor of Joe against you. But this year, you kind of bucked the whole history can't win in the playoffs thing too.
Right.
Um, I mean, it's hard. I usually go with the logic pick. I don't take chances with my picks. I'm going with the logic pick and picking Joe. However, I agree with you. I actually agree with you exactly with what you said. I think this game's actually going to be closer than people think.
Yep.
I do think it's going to be closer than your regular season game. I think it's going to be, it could be, we have never had a dramatic championship in this league. This league has a history of pretty dull championship games. We've had quite a few blowouts. And this postseason, I think you'll admit, James, it's been pretty dull in terms of there hasn't been any close games
Right.
yet. I'm thinking this may be the closest one we have. We haven't. The closest Super Bowl we've played is when Jordan beat me in 2010. He beat me by 12, and that was the only championship that's really come down to the final game. I think it's gonna be very close, and it could. We'll see. It really depends. I don't know if we'll have any Monday night guys. The only way we have this will come down to Monday night is if you play Marvin Jones here.
Right.
But otherwise it's going to be decided Sunday. Otherwise, I mean, the game's likely going to be decided on Sunday night. But the game very well could end up, in the hands of, your a Baltimore running back and the Broncos defense on Christmas Day.
Right.
Um, and it wouldn't shock me to see that happen. So I think Joe's going to win. I think it's going to be close, though. And,
Mhm.
anything can happen, as you've said plenty of times this year. It wouldn't shock me to see you pull it out.
Right.
But we've had plenty worse teams win championships. So we'll see what happens. But that is it. Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Uh, best of luck to Joe, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody. And Brendan, I love you, but go fuck yourself. Tom Brady ate dick for you last week.
I think Brendan said something to that tune on Facebook at some point, but with your name,
Oh,
something similar. But Joe actually put on Facebook, and I'm sure he wants me to say that he wishes you the best of luck as well, and hopes the best team wins this week,
thank you, Joe.
which is very Joe, like Joe. So he was,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure he would have been on here if he wasn't appeasing last minute Christmas shoppers tonight. So,
Of course.
but
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, but that's it. I'm also going to wish everybody Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and this is just about it. We're going to be on next week as well, doing a rap show, and
Awesome.
kind of just have some fun. Um, Probably laugh at everybody for the stupid decisions they made at some point this year.
Hey,
Um,
I would love Brendan to come on.
we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll
Bentley
see.
agrees.
Bentley does agree. All right, that's it.